This presentation was produced under U.S. Department of Education contract number GS00F115CA with Synergy Enterprises Incorporated. The views expressed herein do not necessarily represent the positions or policies of the U.S. Department of Education. No official endorsement by the U.S. Department of Education of any product, commodity, service, or enterprise mentioned herein is intended or should be inferred.
Aloha and welcome to the second podcast of the Native American Language Resource Center summer series on how to create an immersion school. I am Olani Lily, and today I'm here with Kau'i Sang from the Hawaii Department of Education, Office of Hawaiian Education. She'll be sharing her expertise in developing statewide structures for Native language learning and proficiencies. Welcome, Kau'i.
Aloha mai kako o wau ke ia o Kau'i Sang he kupa aina wau no kaiulu o wai manalo he aina ho pula pula kai I hana I ai wau a hana ia pu wau ma luna o ka ike o ka ohana me ke kaiulu pu ke kahi ai o wai manalo I ka moku puni o ahu o ka puhi hewa he pukana wau mai ka oihana mai nā kula au puni o Hawai'i o Haulani ko umakua kane a o Ululani ko panku umakua hine he mau makua ia I hana ia na ko lako mau makua ma ke ano Hawai'i a ole ma ka olelo Hawai'i a no lila a ole I hana ia ma ko olelo Hawai'i I loko no ko mako hana ia ana Hawaii ua nui ko lako kalele ma luna o ka hana ma ke ano he ohana ma na mea like ole a ma na po ai a pili like ole a me ke la wau e komo ai I loko o ke ia aulike ana ma waina o ka poe oiwi o Amerika e ka ipu kako no ke ki'i aku I ka lana kila ke ea o ka poe oiwi hoi. Aloha, my name is Kau'i Sang and I am a kiki o ka aina from Waimanalo, the community and the family that raised and taught me the value of what it means to be a part of a community, what it means to be a part of a family, a strong ohana structure. I am a graduate of our public education system here in Hawaii and raised by my parents, Haulani Sang and Ululani Upahu, both of who were raised by their parents in various Hawaiian ways of knowing and thinking, but without Olelo Hawaiian.
Thank you so much for joining us. I reached out to Kau'i because I think she has a really unique perspective in the sense of being very connected to her place, her culture, and her language, but playing within a larger landscape around education within the state of Hawaii, and really brings that heart and that passion to that work. As we get into the work, I just wanted to ask if you could tell us how your work meets a need within the Native language immersion community.
In Hawaii, the public education system is a single SEA-LEA entity that provides education through both Department of Education schools and public charter schools. My office, the Office of Hawaiian Education, or OHE, is situated at the state level of the Department of Education. My office was established within the state level only a few years ago, 2015. We're currently sunsetting our second delivery plan, which focuses on a mission to ground the public education system in Hawaii to Hawaiian ways of knowing so that all of Hawaii may thrive. And so within that context, I think the work that we do as an office is to make space so that our Kaipuni program, our Hawaiian language immersion program, can find parity within a system that honors both languages and hopefully works towards a full establishment of a dual language pathway system where Olelo Hawaii is elevated and viewed within the community as one of the premier education programs of the Department of Education. And so the role that I play in that really starts with sort of the self-definition of the responsibilities that we have, recognizing that there wasn't real precedence to follow before 2015. My role has sort of evolved over the time since the office opened in 2015, but most of the focus has been around seeking that parity for Olelo Hawaii and doing different things in the system in order to reach that parity. our work really sits on the shoulders of, our trailblazing Hawaiian language experts of the early 1970s who fought to make space and who broke the seal of access to public education for Olelo Hawaii back in 1987 with the establishment of our first Kaiapuni schools. OHE intends to innovate the system and the methodology of ohana as a practice that informs how we should behave as a system. And so we're working towards doing that.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, we're talking about assessment, right? And assessment of language of Olelo Hawaii within the context of like an immersion school. But really, sometimes assessment and student learning standards can really drive mindset change. And so I was wondering, I wanted to ask you about like, why did Hawaii engage and start the journey, I guess, to take ownership over their own assessments and data?
I moved up to the state office back in I don't remember, maybe 2007, 2006, 2007. And at that time, coming out of the school, I think we started to feel the stronger effects of what was happening to our students relative to standardized assessment. And then the department really needed to sort of be in compliance with federal policy. And so sort of shift their practice, right? Because the measurements were defined by a community that was external to Kaiapuni, that was external to the language of our community. And so that was one of the biggest challenges because we were no longer able to control what success outcomes look like in a Kaiapuni learning environment.
And so could you share a little bit about how the why informed like the paths you took and the decisions you made in developing that statewide immersion assessment?
It's not a task that's born on the shoulders of a single person.
Yeah.
We know that our Kaiapuni schools are only successful because of ohana, because of the families that put their kids into the program, because of the commitment and sort of the awamo, the carrying of kuleana that doesn't have to rest on the shoulders of a single person. The preservation of that method was super important. Lifting up the voices of all of the stakeholders so that we were always on the same page about why Kaiapuni education matters to the folks that commit their students to us really kind of started to cinch up, if you will, some of the gaps that were created relative to this compliance issue. The reestablishment of the aha kauleo allowed us to bring those voices back. Teachers, the school administrators, our community supporters, sort of a council of representative voices from all of the schools across the state.
Yeah, and so, I mean, with that, how did you engage that broader stakeholder group in the process of developing your assessment? And why did you do the things you did?
Just yesterday, the Office of Hawaiian Education held its first meeting to work towards building a kindergarten entry assessment. The state mandated that all students entering kindergarten starting this fall are tested for readiness, kindergarten readiness. And there is no kindergarten readiness assessment right now. And so the best thing for us to do was to actually follow precedents. We're still working through some of the kinks within the community on how to get there. But I think generally, with the Kaiapuni assessment on educational outcomes, the one that we currently use for assessing for federal accountability for students in Kaiapuni, grades 3 to 8, there's already a practice and a protocol to do that. And so we tapped back into that practice and protocol and said, how do we do this? And so there's a theory of action that was drafted by the team that currently maintains our assessment tool. And that theory of action speaks to an essential element of our practice is to convene those voices. And so when we set up the process, the how to get to the end, we make sure that including in authentic and genuine ways the voices of those folks that are actually in the practice. And so yesterday the room was filled because it's a kindergarten readiness assessment. It was filled with kindergarten teachers.
Awesome.
There's invitations made to experts, there's invitations made to community members to participate, and we start the meeting off by acknowledging that they are the SMEs in the room. we had to turn to the folks that were doing the work. The other part of sort of this process, though, also includes open communication with the community. If there are questions that they have, those questions can be addressed.
Yeah, and as an administrator for a school that was having teachers involved in that assessment process, I think you folks also provided like the support and resources to pull those teachers out, of the classroom, to have them be engaged in a meaningful way. And then the comeback to the school was really huge, the discussions teachers had in developing and working with you folks on that assessment really fed back to the school. I don't know if you guys thought about this, but it was really a professional development.
Yeah, for sure. And we continue to hear that all the time.
Yeah.
But it makes sense though, because teachers are talking about things that teachers should be talking about.
Yeah.
As the experts of that work, our teachers are even the ones that come back into score assessment, write new assessment items. We always have this pool of product that can keep and sustain the assessment itself. But in the practice of doing that and continuing to invite those voices, we're getting teachers to focus in on the standards. We're getting teachers to have conversation about those standards. And we're getting teachers to challenge whether or not those standards should still be setting what we do in front of us, because they're seeing what's happening in the classrooms, right?
Right.
Yeah, and I used to be mentored by Dr. Noelle Warner when I was a kindergarten teacher back in forever ago. One of the sort of outputs of his work was to be able to expand the degree to which Olelo Hawaii is being used in classrooms at earlier grades. And when I talk about expand, I think as a Hawaiian language speaker, I feel like my language could be viewed as very basic because I use the same sort of vocabulary in my speech all the time. But, Dr. Warner's work was trying to make sure that we could expand into multiple contexts and use the vocabulary that was maybe speaking to the same idea, but in a more detailed or directed way. And so through these kinds of processes, I think it informs not sort of just where we're at, but also where we could continue to go to as we start to build this out even more.
And I guess, which sort of leads me back to circle back to this question about like, what sort of spurred the state to start to think about creating these standards that you're working on, as well as the assessment?
I think sort of the catalyst for, okay, let's pay attention now was again driven by families, driven by the community. That's when the department decided, let's try to figure out what can we do. The superintendent at the time was Kathy Matayoshi. And I remember sitting in a room with her and the board chair at the time, Don Horner, when they told us, we're going to give you guys the decision-making authority to define. And we're going to advocate that you guys get the funding to do that. And so there was an allocation of $3 million at the time to start the process. And so it did require a little bit of push from the community and then a little bit of pull from the department to get the resources in place. I have to acknowledge right now in this podcast that Dr. Kalihua Krug was a beast taking on that task as the PI. And he took on the challenge wholeheartedly and started the process with teachers for standards development and then working into standing up the Ka'eo assessment. And then I also want to acknowledge here Dr. Pohai Kuhia Schultz, who's taken the reins since his departure from the university and has continued to maintain the quality of the assessment and the commitment to seek full peer review. And it's close to full peer review.
Amazing. Sorry, I just got to breathe through that one. That's like,
But I want to acknowledge here that they were both parents of Kaiapuni students as well.
Yeah.
Right. And so going back to this concept of Ohana, the commitment to make it work for ourselves, people were just all in.
Yeah. The right people and the right time and the right push and the right pull sort of all came together, like that tipping point thing, and they were there.
If you're going to give it to us, we're going to get it done.
Yeah. When the first Ahapunanaleo started, right? I know they had that dream, right? They had that dream about renormalizing Olelo Hawaii, but just in those 38 years of immersion. Yeah. So that's awesome. I mean, thank you again for sharing the why and the we and how you engage that. I want to sort of transition our conversation into a little bit more nuts and bolts on the how, both on the standards that you are now sort of pushing out to the larger system of education in the state of Hawaii, as well as the immersion. So kind of talking about those two things. You have covered a lot of like the hows for the immersion assessment creation, but maybe take a step and look at the work you're doing around standards and how you have those standards be adopted by a statewide system of education.
Yeah.
Which is
Yeah.
huge, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's huge.
Back in 2013, 2014, when we were given the opportunity to take control of our own narrative, the first thing we had to do was question whether or not we knew what was going on in our school. And so we had to ask that of teachers, like, what's going on in your classrooms? Because we couldn't set the target too high, or we couldn't set the target too low.
Yeah.
And we needed to get to some kind of consensus about where we were, what was informing the practice, what's the mo'oku'auhau of that work. Is it intended to elevate and strengthen the language proficiency of our students? Is it intended to do something else? To ask all of those questions of our teachers. And then we had to shoot at the target. Like, where's the middle of that? Where's the floor? Where's the ceiling? And where's the middle? And how do we start to think about where to start building those standards? And we did that without even considering sort of the broader set of standards of the department, which was at the time Common Core. We said we're not going to look at Common Core at all, because if we look at that, our guess was that we were already closer to mimicking that in practice than not. And so we started with that conversation with teachers, and then we began drafting based on the input that we got from teachers and some sort of back and forth with those teachers, and then started to vet the first draft of it, not just with teachers, but also with language experts, of course, our parents and the folks in the AHKO, which led up to a final draft. Once we had that final draft, then the actual work had to start around validating that set of standards within the context of federal compliance and making sure that our mo'olelo, our story that we told about the drafting of those standards, could make sense to the folks that were going to review our assessment. Title I says single set of standards,
right?
And the same set of standards for all kids,
right?
We had to make sure that there was a presence, or there was a way to articulate the single set of standards. In the first attempt at the peer review was a partial pass, and then we're even closer to fully meeting in the second peer review. We're going back in next year and tweaking some of the things in order to hopefully get full peer review in the next pass. And so I think the nuts and bolts of that is like focusing in on, okay, what are we trying to get to in the short term?
Yeah.
And why? And then our next step is then to readdress the question of standards. I'm excited because we're starting a process to investigate the distance between our Hawaiian language arts standards and our English language arts standards. I think we're trying to influence the way language arts is viewed at a public policy level, and asking whether or not we should be defining our standards as English language arts standards or language arts standards.
Just language arts, yeah.
And so that's the work that we're moving into now, and we're inviting sort of a bigger group of folks, not just now continuing the conversation to Kaiapuni, but also to say like, hey, link those folks that are English language medium schools.
Right.
How do we create the crosswalks together so that we can identify what is happening in all schools for all, and what is not happening in all schools for all?
Prior to this, we had been on a live session, and there was lots of questions around like immersion assessment. And I think some people just think it's all just about assessing language, but it's not. I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's assessing content knowledge and what's provided in instruction. So just like another assessment, it's doing math, and is science now a piece of the assessment? And then language arts, right?
Yeah, for our Hawaiian language immersion community, what we're doing relative to federal assessment is testing students in grades 3 to 8 for Hawaiian language arts. We're testing students in grades 3 to 8 for our Common Core math standards. And the reason why we're doing Common Core math standards is because that is what the teachers said should be done. The ask was to just translate Common Core math. And so that's what we did. And then for science, we took a whole different approach. We actually brought in environmentalists, AINA-based educators that are focused in on kilo and sort of those practices. And we asked them, what does Hawaiian science look like?
Mm.
And that was the first step. We actually crosswalked back to the state standard, which is currently the next generation science standards.
Yeah.
And so there is a set of science standards for our Kaipuni schools that we assess for in federal assessment package. It is the form of NGSS within a Kaipuni context.
Yeah. So, I mean, we were talking a lot about who you brought together, how you brought them together, how you were engaging them from a real inclusive and collaborative process. But you mentioned there's a whole technical side, right, to this.
Yeah. So it's worked through our assessment accountability branch. They're the office that maintains the work around all assessments for the Department of Education. They're the ones that host the MOU between the Department of Education and the University of Hawaii at Manoa for the Ka'eo assessment. And they're the ones that help agendize the steps that Ka'eo needs to follow to meet federal compliance.
Mm-hmm.
Annually, there is a technical advisory committee meeting where reviewers will take a look at the technical qualities of the assessment and then offer input on how to adjust left and right. In terms of trailblazing work, I would say that they're having to be the one that sets precedent for what could be relative to an assessment tool for content knowledge and skills to meet federal accountability. But we participate in that. There are reports that have to be met every year. Students and families and schools have to get those same kinds of assessment or result reports through the system. The communication of supports to schools on how to administer the test goes through the same process as our English assessments. And so all of those systems are already set up to sort of maintain themselves, if you will.
Amazing. And amazing too that there's this whole other field around like psychometrician and indigenous psychometricianing, I guess. Awesome. So is the assessment, this is just some nuts and bolts, is the assessment written?
It's an online assessment. The kids take the test online. They have to produce speech and record. There's listening and then responding to prompts, input, multiple choice. There might be extended response. There's drag and drop, all of that. The Ka'eo team has contracted with platform developers to make sure that they were providing a tactile opportunity so that it could meet the same formats as what students in the English program would experience as well.
Yeah. Awesome. And that's given once a year, is that right?
It is a summative assessment, so yes, once a year.
Then there's a report that comes out. What happens with that student learning data once that report is created?
Yes, I personally have not had any conversations with families on how they interact with the data from the reports. I know that as a parent, I received the report, and so I could have conversations with my own child about what the report was saying about their learning. In terms of what happens as a school, I've definitely seen schools look at the data and look at the trends in the data. I think COVID was a super big eye opener for everybody, right? What was interesting was that the trend was the same. I mean, in terms of the dip and then sort of the comeback. I sat in on a conversation with the Ka'eo team where they started to show sort of the gains, the recovery rate, comparing Native Hawaiian population of students in Kaipuni against Native Hawaiian population in non-Kaipuni, and how they were performing in terms of the recovery. It looked like the gains were a little bit higher for Native Hawaiian population within Kaipuni context, which was exciting. It was exciting information. Right, so we at the state office, we look at those aggregate and it's like, okay, what are the big trends? But at the school level, I heard from schools who have said, we're having data team conversations about what this data is saying. And we're asking, what are the formative assessment tools now that become essential? That's sparked a whole nother line of work within our office with our champion, Aulia Austin, who is driving to make sure that we have a formative assessment tool in Ola, Hawaii now.
Nice.
So we're working towards that, a language screening tool.
Yeah, I mean, it just goes to show all the work around how much assessment and thinking about learning standards really sets the foundation for real key decisions you have to make along the path. That's a lever of empowerment, right? Just amazing, amazing fruit.
While this work definitely excites me and keeps us on our toes to move and strengthen the program, I also don't want to project a message that this is where all of the work should be. I
Yeah.
think we're trying to do something far bigger than sort of this model of education whose distance is only really short between what we do in Western schools and what we do in Filipino schools. I think we are trying to push our program closer to what a community-based model might look like
Right.
when all stakeholders of a community are contributing the gifts that they bring to sustain a community and getting our students into the practice of being able to sit in front of masters
Yeah.
in a different way. And so I feel like, at Kaumeke, they are so close to that. And that, and as I'm going to point to your work as well and say, that's why those schools are important.
The work that you've been doing around like valuing practitioners, valuing teachers as being a real key part of the educational system, and community people and family as being the first educators and the ongoing educators, and how you're blending that all into this very formal structure of statewide education is exciting and definitely a model. Just to sort of wrap up this amazing conversation is, with your work, what do you think the implications of the work that you and others have been doing could be for other states and at the federal level?
The work that you're doing has to get to the point where these folks are able to sustain themselves
Yeah.
in their own communities, in their own languages. Keeping that sort of as a focus point, asking the kinds of questions that'll make sure that their voices are heard and that those voices inform decision-making protocols are going to be super important. And so if you really want to focus in on what's good for Indigenous learners, you should ask the Indigenous community. Yeah, you should elevate the voices of the Indigenous community.
Yeah. Mahalo to you, Chloe, for sharing the amazing work that you're doing and the way that you are really like moving the state of Hawaii educational system to a place that is Hawaii to be, and not just based on race or ethnicity, but because we love this place, whoever we are, right? And we want to be a part of that place. So thank you.